Nuclear standoff turns into conflict. US and Israel launch major strikes on Iran amid rising regional tension. The United States and Israel have launched significant military strikes on Iran, marking one of the most serious escalations in Middle East tensions in recent years. The operation comes amid long-running disputes over Iran's nuclear ambitions and growing instability across the region. Now let's explore this story in detail and uncover the facts on our AI podcast.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We're unpacking a highly sensitive and rapidly unfolding global event today.
Yeah, it is moving incredibly fast.
It really is. So if you are trying to make sense of the barrage of headlines and alerts hitting your phone right now, you are in the exact right place.
Absolutely.
Our roadmap for this conversation is a comprehensive report we have today. It's titled The Lion and the Eagle: Allied Strikes on Iran.
Which is a heavy document.
It's massive, and our mission here is simple, really. We want to cut through the noise, break down the factual details of the coordinated military strikes launched by the United States and Israel against Iran early this past Saturday, and, just understand what the immediate fallout actually looks like.
Right, and that means looking objectively at the facts on the ground. When you're dealing with a major military escalation of this magnitude, the most important thing we can do is connect the dots.
Connect the dots between the kinetic military actions, right?
Exactly. Connect those actions to the failed diplomacy that preceded them and look at the wider regional impact. Our goal here isn't to tell you who is right or wrong in this incredibly charged conflict.
No, not at all.
We are looking strictly at the sequence of events and the stated goals of the leaders involved. We just want to help you form your own understanding of a very volatile situation.
Okay, let's unpack this. The inciting incident, the spark that ignited this current phase, occurred early Saturday.
Right.
The core fact is this. The United States and Israel launched coordinated military strikes on targets across Iran. And the picture on the ground was, well, it was chaotic.
Very fast-moving.
You had multiple confirmed reports of explosions rocking Tehran and other major Iranian cities, smoke rising over the capital skyline, and Iran immediately shuttering its airspace in response.
And the terminology being used to frame these strikes is, it's our first major clue in understanding the geopolitical positioning at play here. Well, Israel's defense ministry didn't just call this an attack or a retaliation. They categorized their actions specifically as a preemptive military strike.
Preemptive.
Right. They stated the operation was designed to actively remove threats against the state of Israel before those threats could be fully realized.
But calling it preemptive is a very deliberate legal and political choice, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It frames the narrative right out of the gate before the dust even settles. They're essentially saying, we struck first because we were about to be struck.
Precisely. It's a justification rooted entirely in the idea of an imminent threat. And you see that reflected in the specific targets Israeli military officials went after.
They weren't just going after random buildings.
No, they didn't hit random government buildings. The focus was heavily on Iranian missile systems, military infrastructure, and other strategic sites.
I want to dig into that word infrastructure because it sounds a bit sterile when you read it in a report. What does hitting military infrastructure actually achieve in a scenario like this?
It's a crucial distinction to make. When you target military infrastructure alongside the actual missile systems, you aren't just blowing up the offensive weapons themselves.
You're hitting the support system.
Exactly. You are actively degrading the foundational support required to launch, guide, and maintain those weapons.
So we're talking about?
We are talking about degrading command and control centers, radar installations, communication hubs, fuel depots. It's a calculated attempt to temporarily or permanently blind the opponent's capacity to project power across the region.
You're trying to sever the brain from the muscle.
That is a perfect way to put it.
Which brings a massive level of complexity to the operation. And what really stands out to me is the compressed timeline of it all. While these offensive strikes were happening hundreds of miles away, the domestic situation inside Israel was shifting instantaneously.
Completely instantaneous.
Sirens were sounding across the country. Authorities were issuing warnings of imminent retaliatory missile or unmanned aerial vehicle UAV attacks from Iran.
It's the stark reality of modern regional conflicts. The gap between an offensive strike and a defensive lockdown has shrunk to absolute zero.
Right. Israel was pivoting to civil defense while the jets were likely still in the air.
Oh, without a doubt.
Airspace closures, emergency alerts pinging across millions of phones, civilians being rushed into shelters. It's the sudden, dual-sided nature of modern warfare.
You have highly complex offensive operations executing abroad and simultaneous society-wide lockdowns happening at home.
It perfectly illustrates why the margin for error in these operations is practically non-existent.
The immediate impact on civilian life on both sides is instantaneous. And that scale of operation, that level of coordination and risk, brings us squarely to the involvement of the United States.
Yeah, let's shift to that because the U.S. footprint in this operation completely changes the scale. They weren't just providing intelligence or secondary support.
No, they were actively involved in the strikes.
And this was confirmed in a video message released by U.S. President Donald Trump. And the specific phrasing he used is heavy. He described the actions as major combat operations in Iran.
That phrase, major combat operations, carries immense strategic and historical weight.
It's not a term you just throw around.
It really isn't. It's not thrown around lightly in military doctrine at all. It signals a hard departure from limited surgical strikes or covert intelligence operations.
It's a completely different level.
It tells the international community that the U.S. has committed significant conventional forces and accepts a high threshold of engagement.
And the president outlined very specific justifications for crossing that threshold. The message stated the strikes were intended to defend the American people and eliminate imminent threats posed by the Iranian regime.
And we should note what those threats were.
Right. Crucially, the threats explicitly named in the address were related to ballistic missiles and Iran's nuclear program.
Which ties directly back to Israel's preemptive framing from earlier.
The ticking clock.
Exactly. Both nations are anchoring their military actions in the concept of neutralizing a ticking clock, specifically the clock on Iran's nuclear and ballistic capabilities.
What I found truly fascinating about the president's video message wasn't just the military confirmation, though. It was how incredibly layered the communication was.
It was a masterclass in multi-audience messaging.
It really was. It wasn't a standard briefing. He issued a direct warning to Iran's military forces, stating plainly that they could face heavy losses if they didn't surrender.
Right.
But in that exact same message, he pivoted to a direct plea urging the Iranian people to rise up against their government.
A total shift in tone.
And on top of all that, he included a very sobering acknowledgement that American casualties were a possibility in this offensive.
What's fascinating here is the strategy of the multi-audience address. When a global leader releases a message like this during an active kinetic operation, they are engaging in complex psychological warfare.
They're hitting all the bases.
He's speaking to three distinct factions simultaneously. First, he's addressing the domestic citizens of the United States. He's managing expectations, preparing them for the gravity of the situation, and bracing them for the potential human cost.
Setting the psychological groundwork at home.
Exactly. Second, he's speaking directly to the enemy's military apparatus. Threatening heavy losses if they don't stand down is an attempt to introduce hesitation into the Iranian chain of command.
Right, make them second guess.
If you can make a general second guess an order or a radar operator abandon their post, you've achieved a tactical victory without firing a single shot.
Wow.
And third, he's speaking to the Iranian civilian population, attempting to fracture the internal political support for the regime during a moment of profound national stress.
It's a fascinating PR and psychological strategy to break down, simply because it is doing so much heavy lifting all at once.
It
is.
Yeah.
But it really makes you step back and wonder, how did the situation deteriorate to the point of major combat operations? You don't just wake up one Saturday and launch coordinated multi-nation strikes.
No, you don't.
So what does this all mean, and why now? The background information here points directly to a massive collapse in international diplomacy.
Yes, the timeline shows that this military escalation directly followed weeks of failed diplomatic talks between the U.S. and Iran.
And what were those talks about?
The primary overarching focus of those negotiations was aimed at curbing Tehran's nuclear ambitions.
And the talks didn't just gradually lose momentum. They slammed into very specific, seemingly insurmountable walls.
Walls, really?
Yeah. The reporting cites U.S. officials who detailed two massive hurdles. First, deep disagreements on placing limits on Iran's ballistic missile program.
Right.
And second, the incredibly complex, thorny issue of how to actually verify Iran's nuclear activities.
Verification is the ultimate sticking point. It raises a fundamental question about the mechanics of international diplomacy. It is one thing to draft a treaty and agree to a set of rules on paper.
But it's another to enforce it.
It is an entirely different universe to agree on how you prove those rules are being followed in practice. Verification is so often the graveyard of nuclear diplomacy.
Why is that, though? For the listener trying to grasp the mechanics here, verification sounds straightforward. You send people in, they look around, they report back. Why does it break down so completely?
Because the logistics of transparency are incredibly invasive. You need independent inspectors, you need unfettered access to highly sensitive military facilities, you need 24/7 camera surveillance.
Which no sovereign nation wants.
Exactly. And you need continuous environmental monitoring to test for radioactive isotopes. And remember, much of the technology used in a nuclear program is dual use.
Dual use, meaning it has both civilian and military applications.
Right. The same centrifuges that enrich uranium for a peaceful civilian power grid can, if spun longer and faster, enrich uranium for a weapon.
So the line between a civilian power plant and a weapons facility isn't a different building. It's the intent and the operational specifics happening inside the exact same building.
Precisely. If both sides cannot agree on the sheer invasive logistics required to monitor that line where cameras go, who gets to look at the footage, which buildings are off limits for national security reasons, trust evaporates instantly.
And that lack of trust is blaringly evident in the conflicting narratives we are seeing.
It's night and day.
On one side, you have Iran's firm, repeated insistence that its nuclear program is strictly peaceful, meant only for civilian energy and medical research.
Right.
On the opposing side, you have the Trump administration's repeated claims that Iran is actively working to restart covert activities, effectively shortening the timeline, the breakout time needed to develop a viable nuclear weapon.
And right in the middle of those two diametrically opposed claims sits perhaps the most critical sentence in the entire background section of our source document.
What's that?
It plainly states that independent verification remains unclear.
Independent verification remains unclear. That one phrase really is the crux of the entire conflict.
It is. For you, as someone trying to understand the genesis of this escalation, that fog of verification is the master key.
Without that, you have nothing.
Without clear, independent, undeniable consensus from international watchdog agencies, or when those agencies are denied the access they need to even form a consensus, diplomacy loses its foundation entirely.
It just crumbles.
The lack of verified truth creates a volatile vacuum. And in geopolitics, especially in the Middle East, that vacuum is almost always filled by military posturing and eventually military action.
Which is exactly what we saw this weekend. And the action, of course, didn't stop with the Allied strikes. The timeline brings us right up to the present hyper-tense moment.
It's far from over.
Iranian officials immediately threatened retaliation. They raised the specter of missile and drone attacks targeting both Israeli and U.S. positions across the region.
And we are already seeing the leading edge of that retaliation materialize. Sirens have been reported ringing out in northern Israel following Iranian missile launches targeting Israeli territory.
So we're there.
We have officially entered the counterstrike phase.
This is where we have to zoom out and look at the region as a whole. When you introduce a coordinated, multi-nation military strike into the Middle East right now, you aren't doing it in a vacuum.
Not at all.
You have the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, which is already stretching regional stability to its breaking point. You have complex, long-standing proxy struggles between Iran and various Gulf states. It's not just a localized fire.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's like hitting a single tripwire in a highly interconnected, overloaded electrical grid.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
Because the surge doesn't just stay in one wire.
Exactly. The surge threatens to overload the entire system. This is exactly why global leaders and other nations are sounding the alarm so aggressively.
The warnings are stark.
They are. This confrontation could easily ignite a broader conflict. The fear isn't just about a localized exchange of fire between the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
It's the domino effect.
The profound fear is about the domino effect. In a region that is already deeply fractured and heavily militarized, an escalation of this magnitude has the potential to pull in neighboring countries, activate proxy militias across multiple borders simultaneously, and severely disrupt global trade routes and energy markets.
It's a daunting prospect. I mean, the stakes are incredibly high. And as we track this, it is crucial to remember what we don't know yet.
The fog of war.
We are deep in the fog of war. As of right now, official casualty figures have not been released by either side. The full scale of the kinetic operations, the ultimate strategic objectives, the long-term goals of this preemptive action, they all remain frustratingly unclear as events continue to rapidly unfold hour by hour.
That is a vital point for anyone following the story to keep in mind. Initial reports of any military engagement, no matter how reputable the source, are notoriously incomplete.
And often contradictory.
Often contradictory. The true scope of the physical damage, the actual effectiveness of these preemptive strikes in degrading Iran's missile network, and the severity and endurance of the Iranian retaliation will take significant time to accurately assess.
So let's take a breath and summarize the massive scope of what we've mapped out in this deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We started with the inciting incident early Saturday. Coordinated preemptive strikes by the U.S. and Israel, purposefully targeting Iranian missile systems and the military infrastructure that supports them, all accompanied by immediate nationwide defensive lockdowns inside Israel.
We examined President Trump's declaration of major combat operations, unpacking the immense strategic weight of that phrase. We also analyzed his multi-layered communication strategy, delivering a warning to the Iranian military, a plea to Iranian civilians, and a sobering reality check to the American public, all in one breath.
We stepped back to understand the diplomatic collapse that paved the way for those jets to take off, highlighting the intractable friction over ballistic missile limits and the complete failure of independent nuclear verification.
The graveyard of diplomacy.
Exactly. And finally, we looked at the immediate unfolding reality. Retaliatory missile launches from Iran and grave warnings from the international community about a destabilized region being pushed to the brink of a much wider, grid-overloading war.
And for you, as a critical consumer of global news, understanding the nuances we discussed today is essential. Knowing the legal and strategic difference between a surgical strike and major combat operations fundamentally changes how you process a headline.
It really does.
Recognizing the friction between a nation claiming peaceful nuclear intentions and the international community's inability to verify those claims helps you see exactly why diplomacy fails. It allows you to evaluate these events logically as they unfold, rather than just reacting to the emotional noise.
I couldn't agree more. Getting past the noise is the whole point. And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you watch this situation develop.
Okay.
It builds directly on the idea of nuclear verification and these preemptive military strikes. We talked at length about striking military infrastructure and bombing missile silos. But if military strikes are highly effective at destroying physical buildings, radar dishes, and hardware, how does the global community address the underlying scientific knowledge a nation has accumulated?
That's the real question.
You can bomb a centrifuge, and you can destroy a laboratory. But how do you address the invisible technological blueprint? The advanced physics and engineering knowledge locked inside the minds of a nation's scientists. That is an infrastructure that cannot simply be bombed away.
It's the true, unresolved dilemma of nuclear proliferation in the modern age. Hardware is replaceable. Knowledge is permanent.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep asking these hard questions, keep seeking out multiple perspectives, and stay informed as this highly volatile global event continues to unfold. Take care.
Okay, one question for you. If Iran retaliates by targeting Israel or US bases in the region, how prepared are regional defense systems to prevent large-scale casualties and infrastructure damage? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.